In a city ruled by corruption, Bola, a simple man from a poor background, finds himself thrust into a battle for justice after his family's life is shattered by a ruthless criminal empire. When the powerful Desmond is arrested, it seems like victory is within reach, but a new, even more dangerous syndicate rises from the shadows. As Bola digs deeper into the criminal underworld, he discovers a world of betrayal, danger, and deceit that threatens not only his life but the future of the city itself. With his back against the wall, Bola must navigate through lies, corruption, and deadly enemies to expose the truth and save everything he holds dear. Will his determination be enough to rewrite his city's fate, or will the forces of darkness prove too powerful to overcome? Once upon a time in a small poor village called Igbo, lived a young man named Bola. A 30-year-old farmer felt trapped in a life of endless struggle. Despite his hard work, his family's circumstances never seemed to improve. His father, Oluwatesin, an aging man worn down by years of labor, and his mother, Nkechi, who was growing frailier by the day, both lived under the constant weight of poverty. Every year, the soil seemed to yield less, and no matter how much Bola toiled, the harvests were meager, barely enough to survive. The dreams he once had of a better life seemed more distant with each passing day, and though he longed for escape, there was nowhere to go. Igbo was all he had ever known, and it seemed as though the cycle of hardship would never end. Yet, despite the crushing despair that surrounded him, Bola began to feel a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Late one evening, as he sat outside, watching the sun dip below the horizon, a thought stirred within him. Maybe there was a way out even if he didn't know how. The thought was fragile, like a seed barely taking root, but for the first time in a long while, Bola wondered if there could be something more to life than the endless toil of the fields. His parents, with their quiet acceptance, had no such dreams anymore, but Bola wasn't sure he could continue accepting a life without hope. That night, as the village settled into the silence of another night of struggle, Bola felt a new, small resolve begin to form. Something, perhaps, was waiting for him beyond the horizon. Every day was a battle for Bola, whose frustration grew with each passing moment. His father, despite their poverty, remained a pillar of hope, offering words of wisdom and encouragement, but Bola couldn't shake the feeling that his life was slipping away in a never-ending cycle of hardship. He had been forced to drop out of school after high school due to the lack of money, and now, with no formal education, he felt trapped in a future that offered no way out. His dreams of a better life seemed further than ever, and with each rejection from the village girls, the weight of his inadequacies became heavier. He began to wonder if he was doomed to live this way forever, stuck in a life where nothing changed, and no opportunities seemed to exist. Loneliness began to consume Bola's thoughts. His isolation felt like a constant companion, deepening the despair that already plagued his heart. While others in the village had families, friends, and the comfort of familiar faces, Bola could only look inward, where the emptiness grew larger. The village seemed to close in on him, and he couldn't help but feel that his inability to provide a future for himself or win the affection of the people around him reflected a deep personal failure. In the quiet of the night, when the rest of the village slept, Bola's doubts festered, and he wondered if he would ever find a way to break free from the chains of his own insecurities. The village women were merciless when Bola mustered the courage to approach them. "Can you even pay my bride price?" one would laugh. "Who would want to marry someone as poor as you?" they would say, causing Bola to feel smaller with each mockery. He never stopped working, but the harsh words from the village women continued to sting. His love life seemed doomed before it had even begun. Still, his father's words stayed with him: "Son, there is more hope in a living dog than in a dead lion." One day, as Bola trudged home from another grueling day on the farm, he noticed a woman standing alone at the edge of the village. She was carrying a bundle of freshly mended clothes, and her gaze seemed distant, as if lost in her own thoughts. Her name was Aminata, and often like him, with no family left except for an elderly couple who had taken her in as their own. Something in her presence felt different. There was a quiet strength in her, a resilience that mirrored his own. As they began to talk, they found an unexpected connection, bonding over their shared experiences of loneliness and hardship. Their conversation felt effortless, as if they had known each other for much longer than they truly had. In that moment, Bola felt something he had not felt in years, a sense of being truly seen. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just a poor, lonely man burdened by the weight of rejection and mockery. He was a person, understood and valued for who he was. Amanota's kindness, her own stories of loss and survival, made Bola realize that he wasn't alone in his struggle. It felt as though fate had brought them together, two souls bound by their shared pain and hope. For the first time, Bola allowed himself to believe that perhaps there was something more to life, something beyond the endless days of toil and rejection. As days passed, Bola and Amanota spent more and more time together, their bond deepening with every shared moment. Amanota would often tell him stories of her childhood, of growing up without parents and the hardships she faced. Bola listened intently, his heart swelling with empathy, as he recognized the pain in her words, mirroring his own struggles. But unlike the other women in the village who had scorned him, Amanota didn't see his poverty or his failures. She saw his heart, his potential, and that recognition stirred something within him. For the first time in years, Bola dared to believe that love might not be a dream beyond his reach. As their connection grew stronger, Bola knew in his heart that he wanted to marry Amanota. The thought of spending his life with her, of building a future together, filled him with a sense of hope he had long since abandoned. But there was still one thing left to do. He had to ask her. The uncertainty of whether she would feel the same way not at him, but the love and respect he had for her made him determined to take the next step. Though the fear of rejection lingered, Bola knew that he could no longer wait in the shadows of doubt. He had to act on the love he felt, no matter the outcome. After weeks of quietly growing closer, Bola found himself standing in front of Amanota, his heart pounding in his chest as he nervously took her hands in his. The weight of the moment hung between them, and Bola could feel the fear of uncertainty pressing against his throat. Amanota, he began, his voice trembling, will you marry me? He knew he had nothing to offer her but the humble life he led, no wealth, no grand gestures, just his heart, raw and sincere, and his unwavering commitment to her. His hands shook as he spoke, but in his eyes, there was a deep honesty, a vulnerability that only she could understand. Amanota's gaze softened, and her eyes filled with tears as she looked at him. The silence between them was thick, but it was filled with something more, hope, love, and the shared weight of their struggles. Finally, with a gentle smile, she replied softly, yes, Bola, I will marry you. In that moment, as her words washed over him, Bola felt a happiness surge through him like never before. It was as if everything he had endured, the pain, the loneliness, the rejection, had all been leading up to this one moment. He didn't need anything more than her love to feel like the richest man alive. The future, once clouded with doubt, now seemed full of endless possibilities. When Bola and Amanota decided to marry, the villagers couldn't hide their surprise. It was a simple ceremony, no extravagant feast, no grand decorations, just a humble traditional wedding that reflected the quiet love they shared. The elders of the village offered their blessings, nodding in approval, but the younger women couldn't contain their scorn. As Bola and Amanota exchanged vows, whispers filled the air. Only two poor souls like them would marry each other, they sneered, their words sharp with judgment. They couldn't understand why anyone would choose such a life, let alone choose it together. Despite the mocking whispers, Bola and Amanota stood firm, their hands clasped tightly, their hearts united in a bond no one could break. The ridicule of the village women stung, but it did nothing to diminish the strength of their love. In the quiet moments between them, in the way they looked at each other, there was a certainty that no amount of gossip could shake. They had each other, and that was enough. Their love was a quiet rebellion against the judgment of the world, a love that didn't need wealth or status, just the promise of a shared future. And for Bola and Aminata, that was everything. Bola and Aminata walked side by side on the farm, their bond deepening with every task they shared. The work was hard, the days long, but in each other's presence, they found a joy that made the struggle feel more bearable. They would spend evenings talking for hours, their conversations filled with dreams of a better life, a life where the weight of poverty didn't dictate their every decision. They talked of a future where they could build something together, where their love would be the foundation of a life free from the endless hardships that had defined their past. Even in the simplest moments, sitting together under the shade of a tree or walking hand in hand to the market, they found a kind of happiness that seemed to make everything else fade into the background. Despite the deep love they shared, Bola couldn't shake the weight of their circumstances. He worked tirelessly, saving every coin he could, hoping that one day he would be able to provide for Aminata and give her the life she deserved, one without hunger, without the constant strain of their poverty. But as much as he dreamed of a brighter future, a quiet doubt gnawed at him. He knew, deep down, that breaking free from the shackles of poverty wasn't something he could do on his own. It would take something far beyond his control, a miracle, perhaps, to change the course of their lives. Yet, in Aminata's eyes, he found the strength to keep going, even when the road ahead seemed impossible. Together, they clung to the hope that someday, somehow, they would find a way out. One day, as Bola toiled in the field under the blistering sun, he encountered a challenge that seemed insurmountable, a deep-rooted tree blocking his path. He had tried everything, digging around it, hacking at its base, but the tree remained stubborn, its roots entwined in the earth like iron chains. For hours, Bola labored, his hands blistered and his body aching with exhaustion. Every attempt to uproot the tree seemed futile, and the weight of frustration settled heavily on him. The thought of giving up crept into his mind, and for a moment, he considered abandoning the task altogether. After all, it was just a tree. But something about it, the way it seemed to stand defiantly in his way, ignited a spark of something deeper inside him. As he wiped the sweat from his brow, just as he was about to surrender, a small voice seemed to rise from within him. "Keep digging," it whispered, quiet but persistent. It wasn't a voice he had heard before, but it felt like something he couldn't ignore. Intrigued by the sudden surge of determination, Bola reluctantly picked up his tools again. He circled the tree, digging carefully around the roots, his hands working with renewed focus. For the first time that day, he felt a strange sense of hope, not just that he might eventually succeed in uprooting the tree, but that maybe this stubborn challenge was a sign. A symbol of something greater, something within himself that he hadn't fully tapped into. With every stroke of the spade, he dug not only through the earth, but into his own doubts, hoping for a breakthrough, hoping that, just like the tree, his life could be uprooted and reshaped. Bola dug deeper, his hands raw and blistered from the relentless work, but something inside him, something beyond exhaustion, pushed him forward. Every swing of the spade seemed to pull him further into the task, as if the earth itself was urging him on. And then, just as his strength was about to give out, something caught his eye. A glimmer. A faint, shining light from beneath the soil. His heart skipped a beat. Could it be? With renewed energy, he scraped away the dirt, his breath quickening. His hands trembled with anticipation as he cleared away the last of the earth, and there it was. An enormous diamond, gleaming in the sunlight, nestled deep in the roots of the tree. For a moment, Bola stood frozen, his mind racing, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't believe it. He had spent his life struggling, toiling for every meal, and now, in the heart of his hard work, he had uncovered something extraordinary. The shock of finding such a treasure left him speechless. It was like a dream, unbelievable, impossible, but there it was, real and undeniable. With a hurried glance around the empty field, Bola quickly covered the diamond with dirt again, hiding it in his bag, his mind spinning with questions. What had he found? Was this truly a miracle, or was he just lost in a moment of madness? He couldn't be sure, but one thing was clear: this discovery had the potential to change everything. It was as if the universe had finally answered his silent prayers for a way out of his life of hardship. But now, Bola had to decide what to do next, and how far he was willing to go for a chance at a different life. When Bola returned home, his heart raced with excitement and disbelief. He couldn't wait to share his extraordinary discovery with Amanota, but before he could go to her, he rushed to Oluwatosin's house. The old man was sitting outside, enjoying the quiet of the evening when Bola arrived, his breath still heavy from the excitement of the find. Without a word, Bola pulled the diamond from his bag and handed it to his father. Oluwatosin's eyes widened as he took the glittering stone into his hands, his fingers trembling slightly. "Do you know what this is, my son?" he asked, his voice low, full of awe and reverence. "This is a diamond, a fortune, Bola." The weight of his words settled heavily in the air. Oluwatosin's eyes studied the diamond carefully, his brow furrowed in thought. "But we must be careful," he added, his tone darkening. "Don't let anyone know about it." "Not yet. This is too precious, too dangerous to share just yet." The caution in his father's voice sent a chill through Bola. Suddenly, the joy of his discovery felt tainted by uncertainty. What were they supposed to do next? Should they keep it hidden, or take it to someone who could help them? The potential for a new life had just opened before him, but now there was the weight of secrecy, of possible danger. Bola's mind raced. Was this truly a blessing, or had he just stumbled into a trap? That night, after Bola had shared the incredible discovery with Amanota, Oluwatosin's expression grew serious. He called an old friend, a well-respected goldsmith named Mr. Tony, who lived in the city. The two men had known each other for many years, and Oluwatosin trusted him to help handle such a rare and valuable find. Oluwatosin explained the situation carefully, detailing how Bola had uncovered the diamond while working in the field. After a brief conversation, they agreed to meet the following morning in the city, where Mr. Tony could examine the diamond more closely and offer advice on what to do next. Bola, his mind buzzing with anticipation, could hardly contain his excitement. The thought of this discovery changing their lives, or finally breaking free from the crushing weight of poverty, consumed him. What if this was their chance? What if this diamond could give them the life they had only dreamed about? He lay in bed that night, staring up at the ceiling, unable to shake the flood of possibilities. The weight of the diamond in his bag felt heavier than ever, a symbol of both hope and uncertainty. His dreams that night were filled with visions of wealth and success, pictures of a life with Amanota, free from struggle, full of promise. But amidst the excitement, a lingering doubt tugged at him. What if things didn't go as planned? What if they were walking into something they couldn't control? Still, as sleep finally claimed him, Bola couldn't help but believe that for the first time in his life, the winds of fate were shifting in his favor. Early the next morning, Bola and Oluwatosin set out for the city, their journey stretching before them like an endless ribbon of dusty roads and rural landscapes. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the land, but Bola barely noticed the passing hours. His thoughts were consumed with the diamond, with the possibility of what it could mean for their future. The weight of the stone, still hidden safely in his bag, felt heavier with every mile they traveled, its potential shimmering in his mind like a beacon of hope. For the first time in his life, he could imagine a future where he no longer had to struggle, where he and Amanota could live free of the constant worry about where the next meal would come from or how to pay the bills. As they neared the city, Bola's heart raced faster, each beat echoing with anticipation. The city loomed in the distance, a place of wealth, opportunity, and, for him, a world of unknown possibilities. The promise of a new life was within reach, but doubt crept into his mind as well. Would the diamond truly be worth something? Was it as valuable as Oluwatosin believed, or was it just a stone, something that looked impressive but would ultimately prove to be worthless? His excitement mixed with a growing sense of uncertainty. What if their hopes were dashed? What if they were about to make a mistake? But still, the thought of a life beyond the poverty they had known for so long kept him moving forward, step by step, toward the city that held the key to their future. When Bola and Oluwatosin finally met Mr. Tony, the goldsmith's reaction was instant and unmistakable. As soon as he laid eyes on the diamond, his expression shifted from curiosity to sheer astonishment. "This is worth billions," he gasped, his voice filled with awe. Bola and Oluwatosin stood frozen, unable to process the magnitude of what they were hearing. They had known the diamond was valuable, but the idea that it could be worth billions seemed beyond belief. The weight of the moment pressed down on them as they exchanged stunned glances, struggling to grasp the reality of what was unfolding. Mr. Tony, noticing their shock, continued, his voice steady but full of urgency. "I know someone who will buy this. He is a very wealthy man, and he deals in rare and precious stones. Let me arrange a meeting." Bola's chest tightened as the word sank in. A buyer, a man who could turn their lives around. It all seemed too good to be true. The excitement in his heart surged, but it was quickly tempered by a wave of anxiety. Could they trust this man? What were his true intentions? And what would the future hold for them once this transaction was made? The possibility of wealth and security was within arm's reach, but the path ahead seemed fraught with uncertainty. Would this be the miracle they had longed for, or was it just another gamble? As Mr. Tony spoke, Bola's mind raced with questions, but one thing was certain: this moment could change everything. The next day, Bola and Oluwatosin set out for the meeting with the wealthy man who would potentially buy the diamond. As they entered the opulent mansion where the transaction was to take place, Bola's heart raced in his chest. The grand house, with its polished marble floors and golden chandeliers, felt like a world entirely separate from the dusty roads and humble village they had left behind. The wealthy man, tall and impeccably dressed, greeted them with a warm smile. When he saw the diamond, his expression transformed. His eyes widened in disbelief, and a broad grin spread across his face. "This is real," he said, his voice thick with excitement. "I'll buy it from you for a generous sum." There was no hesitation in his words. Within moments, the deal was struck. The diamond was carefully weighed and examined one last time, and then the exchange was made. Bola and Oluwatosin, still in shock, found themselves holding a fortune in their hands. It was more money than they could have ever dreamed of, more than they had ever thought possible. Bola could hardly believe it. Just the day before, he had been a poor farmer, with no prospects and no way out of the cycle of hardship. And now, in a matter of hours, everything had changed. The weight of the money in his hands felt surreal, as if the world he had known had shifted on its axis. One moment, he had been struggling to survive, and the next, he was a wealthy man, with a future filled with endless possibilities. The excitement was overwhelming, but beneath it, a quiet fear began to stir. What would they do with all this wealth? Would it bring the happiness they had dreamed of, or would it come with its own set of burdens? With the money from the sale of the diamond, Bola and his family returned to their village, but everything had changed. The once familiar dirt roads and humble homes seemed distant now, as though they belonged to a past life. Bola bought a large, beautiful house in the city, a symbol of the new life he and Aminata had worked so hard for. The sprawling property, with its clean, manicured lawns and modern amenities, was everything they had ever dreamed of. The days of struggling were over, no more long hours toiling under the sun, no more feeling trapped in the cycles of poverty. For the first time, Bola felt a deep, overwhelming sense of relief. The weight of worry that had burdened him for years began to lift, replaced by a new sense of freedom. He finally had the means to provide for Aminata, to offer her a life beyond the hardships they had faced. They could travel, dine in fine restaurants, and enjoy the luxuries that once felt like dreams too distant to reach. But even as they reveled in their newfound wealth, Bola couldn't shake the memory of his roots. A part of him would always carry the village with him, the faces of the people who had supported him along the way. He made a promise to Aminata: no matter how much they had, they would never forget the people who had helped them, the kindnesses extended to them when they had nothing. They would share their good fortune, give back to the community that had shaped them. Yet, as their lives began to change in ways they had never imagined, they could not have foreseen the challenges that awaited them. With fortune came new risks, new dangers they hadn't considered. The wealth they had gained so suddenly now made them targets, and the world they had entered was full of people who would stop at nothing to take what they had. As Bola and Aminata stood on the precipice of their new life, they could feel the weight of this new reality settling in. Their story was just beginning, and the road ahead was filled with both promise and peril. Life in the city was a whirlwind for Bola and Aminata. The contrast from their former life was stark, and every day felt like a new adventure. They spent their time adjusting to their new circumstances, buying new clothes, attending gatherings with people who had once seemed out of reach, and indulging in luxuries they had never dreamed of. Aminata, eager to embrace her new opportunities, enrolled in a prestigious fashion school. She quickly became one of the top students, her talent shining through in every design she crafted. The promise of a brighter future seemed to unfold effortlessly before them. Bola, too, found his place in this new world. He had always loved furniture making, and now, with the resources to back him, he opened a small but stylish shop in the city. His craftsmanship, combined with his growing reputation, attracted customers, and soon his business was booming. For the first time, the success that had once felt like an unreachable dream was now his reality. The couple worked tirelessly, their shared ambition propelling them forward. But despite the wealth, the new friends, and the growing success, Bola couldn't shake a lingering feeling of unease. A dark shadow seemed to hover just beyond the bright lights of their new life, a nagging sense that something wasn't quite right. As his business flourished and they enjoyed their newfound status, Bola began to wonder if the price of his success, his rapid rise to wealth, might come with consequences they had yet to fully understand. The life they had built felt fragile, and the more they had, the more he felt the weight of what they had to lose. Would the shadows ever dissipate, or would they be forced to confront something they weren't prepared for? After settling into their new life in the city, Bola and Aminata decided to visit their parents in the village, eager to share their newfound success. When they arrived in a sleek new car, the sight of it was enough to send waves of shock through the village. The same people who had once dismissed Bola, the women who had mocked him for his poverty, now stared in disbelief. Whispers spread quickly through the community, as the villagers marveled at the transformation. It was clear that Bola's wealth had stunned everyone. His former detractors, who had once ridiculed him for his lack of prospects, now looked on with regret and envy. But Bola wasn't concerned with their judgment. He was content, finally able to provide for his family, and proud of the life he had built with Aminata. To show his gratitude and ensure his parents lived in comfort, Bola built a beautiful house for them, an impressive mansion by village standards. Oluwatosin and Kechi moved in happily, their days of struggle now behind them. However, despite the outward joy and the lavish home, Bola noticed something unsettling in his father's demeanor. One evening, as the family sat together in the spacious living room, Oluwatosin looked at him with a quiet, distant expression. "Things have changed, Bola," he said softly, his voice laced with concern. Bola felt a pang of confusion. Was it simply the adjustment to wealth, the quiet shift from village life to luxury? Or was there something more troubling beneath his father's words, something Bola wasn't seeing? The unease in Oluwatosin's tone lingered in the air, and for the first time since their success, Bola felt a deep knot of doubt tighten in his chest. What had changed? And why did it feel like, despite everything they had gained, there was something they had lost in the process? As time passed, Bola began to notice a subtle but growing shift in his father's behavior. Oluwatosin, who had always been the pillar of strength and wisdom in their family, seemed increasingly distant. He would often sit outside, staring off into the distance with a contemplative expression, his mind clearly preoccupied with something Bola couldn't grasp. At first, Bola chalked it up to his father simply adjusting to their newfound wealth, the change in their circumstances perhaps overwhelming him. But as the days went by, the unease in Oluwatosin's demeanor only deepened, and Bola couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One evening, as they sat outside together, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Oluwatosin finally spoke, breaking the silence that had lingered between them for so long. "Son," he began, his voice low and serious, "we have to be careful. Wealth brings its own set of dangers." Bola laughed it off, assuming his father was merely worried about the fragility of their fortune, the fear of losing everything they had worked so hard to build. But as the words settled in, Bola felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Was it just paranoia? Or was Oluwatosin sensing something he couldn't yet see, something lurking beneath the surface of their new life? The weight of his father's words lingered in the air, and Bola found himself wondering if their rise to wealth had come with more than just opportunity. Was there a hidden threat, a danger they hadn't accounted for, that threatened not only their fortune but their very lives? The feeling of unease wouldn't leave him, and as much as he wanted to dismiss it, the nagging sense that something was wrong continued to gnaw at him.